Bournemouth is a picturesque town on the south coast of England. It's popular with families and tourists looking for sun, sea and sand. But on Friday the 24th of May 2024, a dangerous predator called Nasen Saadi, who referred to himself online as Ninja Killer, was prowling the streets, and he was there for a very different reason. He was there looking for someone to kill, to live out his sick fantasies. Just before midnight, he launched a vicious knife attack against two women sitting on a beach, Amie and Leanne Miles, stabbing them both multiple times. Only one would survive. They were complete strangers to him, simply pieces of meat he would slaughter to make his sad little life matter. Welcome to Evil Among Us. There's very little information available about the subject of this case, Nasen Saadi. What is known is that he was born on the 22nd of December 2003, but his place of birth is not clear. Some articles state that he was born in the UK, but others I've read suggest he came to England when he was 4 years old. Regardless, he spent the majority of his life growing up in Croydon, South London, in an Iraqi Thai family who were apparently quite well off and respected by the local community. Saadi's parents ran a business importing fruit and were described as polite by their neighbours. No one appears to have raised any concerns about Nasen Saadi in his early years. Only a brief summary of Saadi's development was presented in court, with him being described as, quote, a social misfit, someone who had hardly any friends at school, never had a girlfriend, and seemed to be somebody who was avoided rather than somebody's mate. In court, it would be determined that whilst he had some traits of autistic spectrum disorder, he didn't actually have this condition. What traits he displayed are not clear, but I imagine he likely struggled in social situations. But I think this detachment was more likely a sign of his psychopathy, his indifference to others, and also likely his feelings of superiority. He was above them, no one could understand his greatness. Also during the legal proceedings, it was claimed that no one in Nasen Saadi's family had any idea how dangerous he was. But as we'll get to later, this cannot be true. There's evidence that his parents had some idea of what he was developing into and didn't seek any sort of support. But whilst we know almost nothing about Nasen Saadi the child, there's clear evidence of the dangerous man he became. The man who was obsessed with violence, who collected weapons and fantasized about the notoriety he would get from taking another human life, with him even interrogating his university lecturers in order to gather information to enable him to commit the perfect murder. By the time Nasen Saadi turned 18, he was already an unstable, dangerous man, but he was apparently able to conceal this from the world. But when he enrolled at the University of Greenwich, this all changed, and others began to see the clear warning signs. Initially, Saadi began a degree in physical education, but in 2023, he switched to studying criminology and criminal psychology. Saadi would sit in his lectures, and regardless of the topic, he would use this time to interrogate his lecturers, gathering information to commit the perfect murder. As Dr. Lisa Marie Rees later stated in court, on one occasion, she'd given a lecture titled Introduction to Social Sciences, which is about how the UK's political structure is organised, and quote, I'd finished the lecture and asked if there were any questions. He said, can you please go to the point where you talk about murder for self-defence? I was confused because I didn't bring it up in the lecture. I saw my students were confused as to why the question was asked. Dr. Rees said that he also went on to ask what DNA is left behind and for how long, and if police are able to trace back DNA. After this lecture, she asked Saadi as a joke whether he was thinking of committing a murder. He simply stated he was researching information for an article he was writing. On another occasion, Dr. Rees's partner Pamandeep, who was a special constable, came in for a question and answer session and was bombarded with questions by Nasen Saadi, including how to get away with murder, police investigation techniques, how different police forces communicate, and whether committing crimes far away from the offender's home address increases their chances of getting away with it. However, Saadi's questions to Pavandeep also show off another sign of his personality, his misogyny. He asked Pavandeep what he thought about female police officers, saying that they were weaker than men. This was a continuation of statements he repeatedly made to other students about how women were inferior to men and they should only be allowed to work in certain professions. Saadi would also sit in lectures wearing headphones, watching horror movies on his laptop. This, coupled with his generally strange behaviour and misogynistic attitudes, made him unpopular with other students who actively avoided him. However, what was noted in the classroom was just a small glimpse into the sick mind of Nasen Saadi. In his room, Saadi was obsessively looking up details of murders online, such as the killing of 16-year-old Brianna Jai in February 2023 and the murder of 13-year-old Millie Dowler in March 2002. Some of his searches included stabbing, crime maps, knife crime maps, sharpest knives, and what supermarkets UK can you buy kitchen knives. He was also watching violent movies morning, noon and night. Saadi also had a Snapchat account under the name of Ninja Killer. When he decided to turn his fantasies of killing into a reality is unclear, but by early 2024, Saadi was starting to acquire weapons. Over the first few months of this year, he bought at least 6 knives, a meat cleaver, and an axe. He also purchased CS spray, latex gloves, and a balaclava. At some point in around March 2024, Nasen Saadi's parents took an axe and 2 of his knives away from him. Clearly, as we'll circle back to later, they had some idea of what was going on. Their son was collecting weapons. Whether they didn't see the obvious danger or chose to ignore it is unclear. Saadi then moved out and went to live at his aunt and grandfather's home a short distance away, again in Croydon. He took the remaining weapons with him and went straight back to indulging his obsession with violence online. However, during the same month, it was clear that Saadi was starting to formulate a specific plan. There were some indicators that he began looking for opportunities in his local area, as in around February or March 2024, the Metropolitan Police received a report that Saadi was stalking a woman. This didn't result in any action. It seems that Nasen Saadi quickly rejected committing a murder on his own doorstep and made searches such as, why is it harder for a killer to be caught if he does it in another town? Clearly, Saadi believed that the greater the distance from his home, the less chance there would be of getting caught. There is some logic to this. In fact, there is a scary amount of logic to all of Saadi's planning, which we'll cover in greater detail later. In April 2024, Nasen Saadi was researching places to carry out his first kill, and in particular, he was focusing on beaches along the south coast of England, places where there would be thousands of potential targets, but also enough people that he could blend into the background and hopefully avoid detection. He also researched whether it was easier to run on pebbles or sand to help him narrow down the location. Specifically, he seemed to be choosing between Brighton or Bournemouth. Finally, he focused on Bournemouth, a town on the south coast of England with just 7 miles of sandy beaches. He started looking up how many people were on the beaches in the town, both during the day and at night. After looking at maps of CCTV coverage, Saadi further narrowed down his hunting ground to Durleyshire Beach, located a mile west of Bournemouth Pier, due to the number of people who visited this particular area and the number of camera blind spots close by, which he believed would aid his escape. On the 16th of May 2024, 8 days before the murder, Nasen Saadi made a booking for the 23rd and 24th of May via Airbnb at the Silver Howe Hotel, around 400 metres from Durleyshire Beach. The following day, he booked a room at a travel lodge slightly further away from this location for 2 nights, the 21st and the 22nd of May. With his planning completed, at 12:25 p.m. on Tuesday the 21st of May 2024, Nasen Saadi boarded a train at Risselton railway station in Croydon on his way to Bournemouth with murder in mind. He was carrying with him a rucksack containing the knife he would use to end the life of an innocent woman just 3 days later, a woman completely unknown to him, but in his sick mind, her death was necessary for this sad little man to feel a sense of power, to feel like a god. Nasen Saadi arrived in Bournemouth at 2:40 p.m. on Tuesday the 21st of May 2024 and travelled to his first hotel, the Travel Lodge in Westcliff, with him arriving there at 3:17 p.m. Saadi quickly got to work and was captured walking along the promenade next to Durley Beach that evening. No doubt, he was planning his route to and from the area where he decided to strike. He continued this pattern of walking around the area for the next 2 days. On the evening of Wednesday the 22nd of May, Saadi decided to take in a show and watch The Strangers Chapter 1 at the cinema, a film about a couple who are hunted by 3 masked strangers. I'm sure he was revelling in the violence, imagining himself as one of the knife-wielding psychopaths. At 2:22 p.m. on Thursday the 23rd of May, the day before the attack, Saadi, having checked out of the Travel Lodge, was captured checking in to the Silver Howe Hotel, closer to Durley Beach. Again, Saadi continued to conduct reconnaissance of the area, watching the people coming and going both day and night. At 10:40 p.m. on Friday the 24th of May 2024, an hour before the murder, Nasen Saadi was seen pulling his hood up and leaving the Silver Howe Hotel. At this point, he was armed with the murder weapon, which was a knife, the precise dimensions of which will never be known for sure, but it's believed to have had a blade of only 3 inches in length, but it was extremely sharp. By this point, 2 friends were enjoying each other's company on Durley Beach, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. They were 34-year-old Amie Gray and 38-year-old Leanne Miles. Amie was described as a, quote, beautiful person inside and out, someone with a giggly laugh and a big smile. She was a women's football coach and personal trainer, but far more importantly, she was a wife to Sean and also a mother to the couple's daughter. There's no information about Leanne Miles. For obvious reasons, the main focus has been on Amie, but it's important to remember the horror that Leanne went through. The two had met up just before 10 p.m, and by the time that Nasen Saadi left his hotel, they were sat on Durley Beach, having a picnic and a drink together, next to a bonfire they'd started to keep warm. They were friends, simply enjoying the evening together. At 11:06 p.m, Saadi was captured walking up and down the promenade next to the beach, looking for a target. At this point, both Amie and Leanne had their backs to where Saadi was prowling. They didn't see him until it was too late. He was, however, spotted by 2 women who were also sitting on the beach. They noticed Saadi lurking in the shadows watching them, with one of them shouting out, asking him what he was doing. One of the women, who didn't wish to be named, later stated, quote, at the time, we didn't think he would do anything harmful, we just thought he was odd. They then decided to leave because they were getting an uneasy feeling from the man. This decision potentially saved their lives. This CCTV footage captured the moments before the attack. The fire which Amie and Leanne were sitting by is in the right-hand corner of the screen. At 11:38 p.m, Nasen Saadi approached the women, pulled out his knife, began a savage and frenzied attack. Leanne later testified, quote, I just remember we turned round, I looked at this boy. He went towards me first. I remember Amie saying, what are you doing? Get off her. This caused Saadi to turn his attention to Amie, and he plunged the knife into her again and again and again. At autopsy, Amie was found to have received 10 stab wounds. Some of these were defensive injuries, and they were delivered with extreme force. The stab wound that killed her pierced her breastbone and entered her heart, causing Amie to bleed to death in a matter of minutes. In court, further CCTV from the Chineside Cafe was played. This has not been released, likely because it's too harrowing, as whilst it didn't capture the attack itself, the sounds of Amie being attacked could be heard, with her screaming, fighting for her life. Leanne managed to escape and run towards the promenade. Within seconds of ending the life of Amie, Saadi was sprinting after her. When he caught up with Leanne, He plunged the knife into her repeatedly. Leanne was stabbed 20 times, mainly in the back, and this caused one of her lungs to partially collapse. She also suffered a hemothorax, where air and blood enters the cavity of the lung. Whilst being stabbed, Leanne said, quote, "Please stop, I've got children," at which point Saadi suddenly stopped the attack. He was captured walking away from the area at 11:44 p.m, 6 minutes after the attack began. As well as the sounds of the attack being captured on CCTV, a key witness also heard what was going on. His name was Mick Priddle, and he was on a nearby cliff taking pictures of the blood moon. He heard the screams, but it wasn't unusual to hear people shouting and making noises on the beach. Then began walking home and saw Nasen Saadi coming from the direction he'd heard the screams. Mick was some distance away and it was dark, but he was drawn to this man and specifically made a point of noting what he was wearing, a black jacket with a grey stripe across it. His input would be the key to the case eventually being solved. Saadi returned to the Silver Howe Hotel at 11:51 p.m, and at around this same time, Leanne Miles, who was seriously injured and bleeding profusely, called 999. This call was played in court, and Leanne was heard to say, quote, "I've been stabbed loads of times. Oh my God, I'm getting dizzy. Please hurry up. Please hurry up. I'm bleeding everywhere. I've been stabbed multiple times. I can't die. I don't want to die." Just after midnight, paramedics arrived on the scene and rushed to help both women. Leanne was seriously injured but alive, and she was rushed to hospital. When the paramedics went to Amie Gray, they found her unconscious, cold and unresponsive on the beach, lying in a pool of blood. They fought to save her life, but at 12:24 a.m, on Saturday the 25th of May 2024, she was pronounced dead. Leanne Miles would survive, but would spend weeks in hospital recovering from her injuries. Her physical wounds will heal, but I hope she gets the help she needs to deal with the psychological scars. What she must have gone through that night. What she must have seen. The guilt she likely feels that she lived whilst her friend died cannot be understated. Nasen Saadi checked out of the hotel at 9 a.m, and by 11:48 a.m, 12 hours after the murder, he stepped off the train in Croydon and walked home. He was no doubt buzzing. He committed the perfect murder, the first of many. He was a genius. There was no way the police would catch him. However, little did he know, he had just 4 days of freedom left. In the early hours of Saturday the 25th of May 2024, detectives from Dorset Police's Major Crime Unit began their murder investigation, and it would be one of the most challenging they'd ever faced. They had one woman dead, and another who'd been stabbed 20 times, but miraculously had survived. There were no obvious reasons why Amie and Leanne were targeted. They were both loved and well-respected women. They didn't have any enemies. Mick Priddle, who'd heard the horrific sounds of the attack, and who had actually clapped eyes on the killer, came forward and gave police their first lead, a description of the man's clothing, a black jacket with a grey stripe across it. Detectives spent the first few days trawling through thousands of hours of CCTV in the local area before they found their eureka moment. Footage of a man wearing the same type of jacket in the area of the murder during daylight hours. Detectives followed this man's movements, and at 11:32 a.m. on Friday the 24th of May 2024, around 12 hours before the attack, he was captured on CCTV at a Nisa convenience store in Westcliff buying orange juice and crisps. He paid for these items using his bank card. The police checked the details of the card, and they soon had the name of their main suspect, Nasen Saadi, as well as his home address. At 7:35 p.m. on Tuesday the 28th of May 2024, 4 days after the murder, Saadi, a man who thought he was cleverer than everyone else, who thought he'd committed the perfect murder, was staring down the barrel of a gun, but armed police broke down his door to arrest him, as shown by this footage.
Stop! Turn around! Walk backwards! Hang your head! Walk backwards towards my voice.
Show us your
That's
hands,
it.
walk slowly.
Hands on your head. Walk down the stairs. Slowly. Keep walking. Keep walking. Stop. Turn around. Walk backwards. Hands on your head. Walk backwards towards my voice. Walk backwards. Keep walking. Keep walking.
Space.
Bring him out. Out, come out. Get on your knees, down your knees! Down your knees!
Look at me.
Stay there, do not move.
Explain all of it.
I think you're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
The police turned Saadi's house upside down, and in his room, they found knives in his bedside drawer and hidden between a wall and a wardrobe. His parents also gave the police the 2 knives and an axe they'd taken from him in the months prior to the attack. However, none of the knives were the murder weapon, and the clothes that Nasen Saadi wore during the attack were also missing. Neither were ever recovered. Saadi refused to give the PIN number to his phone, no doubt to conceal information on there, but the police gained access to his laptop, and they were able to see the sick world of this self-styled ninja killer, his obsession with violence and murder, and his clear desire to gain a sense of power by taking the life of another. Added to this, whilst the camera footage of the murder was too dark to identify Saadi, his movements in the days before the killing showed him travelling to Bournemouth and completing reconnaissance in the area, clearly planning to turn his sick fantasy into reality. Saadi was interviewed repeatedly over the next few days, and during each interrogation, additional information was presented to him to explain. He couldn't deny that he was in Bournemouth, but he stated he was simply there for a bit of a holiday, not an uncommon destination for people living in London to travel to, but he began to claim gaps in his memory. Bizarrely, he claimed that he couldn't remember his movements after he checked out of the travel lodge on the afternoon of Thursday the 23rd of May 2024, so he had a gap of over 24 hours which covered the time of the murder. He alternated as to the apparent cause of this blackout, blaming sleepwalking but also being drunk. However, as will be shown in the interviews I'm about to play, Nasen Saadi's memory got worse, not better, with him later hilariously claiming that he also could not remember anything after he got back home to Croydon. Before I play a clip from his final police interview on Friday the 31st of May 2024, I want you to check out Saadi's body language. I'll comment on it in a moment.
I think from the start we've said this is about us getting answers, finding the truth. Yeah? It's about trying to establish how Amie died, how Leanne was attacked, and why. There's lots of things here that indicate that you are the person responsible.
And I'm not responsible.
Okay.
And I have no reason to attack someone for no reason.
Have you been motivated by something else?
No comment. I wouldn't attack someone for no reason.
So, but do you understand what I mean? Is there something else going on that will be an explanation as to what's then happened?
No comment.
Your interests?
That's related to my university.
So okay. Your views towards females?
No comment.
So I really think you've got some important information here. You've got some answers here that can help us deal with what's taken place.
I haven't got any.
So now I think we are getting to the point where, do you think there's anything we've not talked about or asked you about that's important that you need to tell us?
I'm just saying I'm wrongly accused of mistaken identity.
Okay.
And mistakes can happen, and I'm just not responsible.
Okay. Is there anything you think we haven't understood?
I think just because someone is wearing the same clothes, is circumstantial.
And having thought about what we've talked about, or what we've just said, are you prepared to tell us things like where the clothing is that you were wearing that night?
No comment.
What we've seen you wearing on the previous nights?
No comment.
The rest of your belongings or possessions are?
No comment.
And crucially, where you were, because it's a very quick inquiry to confirm where you were, to prove or disprove whether you were the person we're saying has moved along the beach and done this attack.
Well, I left Bournemouth on the 25th on like 9 o'clock.
Yeah, we know that, but we're just trying to establish where you were between 11 and midnight. And that will really assist. What's preventing you telling us that?
No comment.
I think what's preventing you is the fact that, as the evidence shows, you are the male that is responsible for the murder and an attempted murder. You were on the beach that night.
But there, beaches are like popular places. Many people on the CCTV that you showed me. There were many like people walking. It's not just one person.
Were you that one person we saw?
No.
Okay. So we'll check a few bits. You mean, you've just told us then, haven't you, about the whole going back on the 25th? Is there anything else you can tell us about what else you were doing on the 24th and 25th?
Well, I was back home on the 25th, but I can't remember anything after.
After what?
I got home.
Okay. But yesterday you couldn't remember anything after the beach at Thursday afternoon?
No.
But we've been able to recall some more information about your movement on the Friday morning, Nisa and the shop, Superdrug. We've managed to establish some more memories about your movement on the beach where this incident happened at 4:30. Yeah? You remember being on the train, wearing the hat and the sunglasses. So, fill in those other blanks. You can't, can you?
No.
And the reason you can't is because the blanks are, you were the male we've just seen on that CCTV that's been identified as being responsible for what's happened to Leanne and to Amie.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Or a statement?
Is that something you'd like to comment on?
No.
Okay. In that case, is there anything from anyone else?
No.
Sure there's nothing you want to add or clarify? In that case, it is 16:25. The interview is concluded and we are turning the recorder off.
In some reports I've read, Saadi is described as sitting in the interview with crossed arms, indicating defiance, but this isn't what's happening here. He's hugging himself, which is a common thing we do when we're distressed and trying to comfort ourselves. This is a guy who knows he's fucked. The police have him, and the only thing he has to fall back on is, it wasn't me, his mistaken identity, but also, I can't remember the entire relevant period of time for reasons. I mean, his claims are so weak and contradictory. If he claims he can't remember anything, how can he be so confident that he wasn't responsible? Hours after this final interview, Nasen Saadi was charged with the murder of Amie Gray and the attempted murder of Leanne Miles. After a short hearing at Poole Magistrates Court the next day, Saturday the 1st of June 2024, he was remanded into prison to await Crown Court proceedings. Nasen Saadi pleaded not guilty to all charges. Why? Probably to drag this out, to get the attention and notoriety he desperately craved. However, it may also have been down to him thinking the case against him was weak. There was no DNA evidence linking him to the crime. The murder weapon and the clothing worn by the killer had not been recovered. In this man's delusional mind, he likely felt that yes, he'd been caught, but he was still smarter than everyone and could somehow wriggle out of the consequences of his actions. He was wrong. The police's case was circumstantial, but it was incredibly strong. During the trial, which began at Winchester Crown Court on Friday the 6th of December 2024 and lasted 12 days, the prosecution laid out everything. Saadi's obsession with violence, the questions he'd asked his lecturers about getting away with murder, his research about Bournemouth, and him doing records in the area before a man wearing the same clothing as him had been seen walking away from a savage attack against two defenceless women. It was also disclosed that Saadi couldn't help himself, and whilst in prison had been telling prison officers at H&P Winchester that he was fascinated with knives. Saadi's defence had not evolved since his arrest. It wasn't me, I can't remember anything. He didn't give evidence, and the prosecution jumped on this, with the barrister saying, quote, "It turns out the defendant has nothing to say. Odd, isn't it?" Unsurprisingly, on Wednesday the 18th of December 2024, Nasen Saadi was found guilty of the murder of Amie Gray and the attempted murder of Leanne Miles. Sentencing was adjourned for completion of mental health reports. On Friday the 28th of March 2025, Saadi was back in court before Mrs. Justice Cutts for sentencing. Interestingly, Justice Cutts told the court that Saadi had admitted his crimes to a clinical psychologist called Dr. Ruttenberg, who had been tasked with assessing him after his conviction. But Saadi still would not admit the extent of his evil, his premeditation. He told Dr. Ruttenberg that he'd been in Bournemouth on holiday and had been walking late at night on the promenade because he didn't like crowds, and had then murdered Amie and tried to end Leanne's life because he'd suddenly been overcome by a homicidal impulse. The judge rejected this. She outlined a possible motivation for the crimes, stating, quote, "Why did you do as you did?" Dr. Ruthenberg's report shed some light on that. You have experienced difficulty socialising and communicating with others by reason of the fact you have some autistic traits, although you do not have ASD. It seems that you have felt humiliated and embarrassed by repeated rejections or perceived rejections of any advances you have made, particularly towards girls, which over time has resulted in a deeply suppressed rage directed towards society and women in particular. You developed an obsessional fascination with violence, horror, crime, and the mind of those who kill, and a deep-seated urge for revenge against society. In Dr. Ruttenberg's view, you identified yourself with the mind of a killer because you wished to feel the power of which you felt society had robbed you by rejecting and humiliating you. The idea of being recognised as a dangerous killer became appealing to you. This assessment came from a key statement that Saadi made, with him saying, quote, "I never got noticed when I did a good thing. People have only noticed when I did a bad thing." The judge also made a specific point to outline the consequences of Saadi's crimes, specifically the murder of Amie Gray. Quote, "That crime left a family devastated by Amie's loss, a family understandably struggling to understand what has happened and to cope. At the time of her death, she was 34 years of age and much loved by her close family and by her friends. She was clearly an exceptional young woman who was full of life and always there when anyone needed her. Her cousin Megan speaks of Amie being her safe place, making her feel loved and welcome whenever they were together. She was brave, strong and independent, always striving to be better. She was a carer for a 90-year-old grandmother who had Alzheimer's. Her mother speaks of the great future she had ahead of her. She was happy, having recently been made a head coach of Dorset futsal, which she loved, and for which she'd received an award, which made her justifiably proud. She had just started to plan a new work venture. She had much to live for, not least her young daughter, who must now face a life without her mother's love and support. This was the person whose life you took in your act of random brutality. You must face the consequences of your actions in the punishment I impose upon you today, but I recognise that nothing this court does can bring Amie back, and her family must forever live with her loss. That said, her warmth and personality continues to shine. As you serve your sentence over the many years you're in custody and are quickly forgotten, she will live on in the hearts of those she inspired and who loved her. She then sentenced him. This was filmed, and I'll play the last part. For the full remarks, I'll leave a link below.
For the grave offence of murder, there is only one sentence prescribed by law, and that is imprisonment for life. That is the sentence I shall impose upon you in due course. However, I am required to determine the minimum period you should serve in prison before you are eligible to be considered for release on parole. It is most important that you and everyone concerned with this case should understand what in fact this means. The minimum term is not a fixed term after which you will automatically be released, but the minimum term that you will spend in custody before your case can be considered by the parole board, and it will be for the parole board to say at that time whether or not you will be released. If they say you should not, you will remain in custody. If and when you are released, you will be subject to licence, and this will be the case for the rest of your life. If for any reason your licence were to be revoked, you would be recalled to prison to serve your life sentence in custody. In coming to the appropriate minimum term for the offence of murder, I must first decide where this case falls within Schedule 21 to the Sentencing Act 2020. There are no factors which would place this offence within paragraph 2 of the schedule. I have considered whether the combination of the two offences for which I am to sentence you places the case in paragraph 3. Although there are some features which would justify such an approach, I have decided that the offence falls more appropriately into paragraph 4. I propose to reflect the offence of attempted murder by a significant uplift in the minimum term I impose for the murder offence. You took at least one knife to the scene which you used to stab and kill Amie Gray. The starting point for the minimum term is therefore one of 25 years. The offence is aggravated by a substantial degree of premeditation and planning. I am satisfied that you were motivated in part by your attitude to women. A degree of mental and physical suffering was inflicted on Miss Gray before her death. I turn to the offence of attempted murder. I place the offence within Category 2B of the sentencing guideline. It is a case of high culpability by reason of you taking a knife to the scene, intending to use it to kill, and you had planned and premeditated the murder. I consider that you caused serious physical harm to Leanne Miles by inflicting the knife wounds upon her, causing her lung to collapse. If sentencing for this offence alone, the starting point under the guideline would be 25 years, with a range of 20 to 30 years imprisonment. Were I sentencing you for this offence alone, I would sentence you as a dangerous offender, as defined by the Sentencing Act. However, the risk you pose will be managed by the minimum term I impose for the murder offence. For that reason, I will impose a concurrent, determinate sentence for the attempted murder of Miss Miles. As I have said, I will increase the minimum term to reflect that offence. I take into account all that has been said on your behalf. You are still young. You are now 21 years of age and were aged 20 at the time of the offences. I will reflect your youth in the sentence I impose, but there is no evidence that you are any less mature than would be expected at your age. Dr. Rothenberg, in his lengthy and helpful report, has raised no concern about your maturity. You have no previous convictions, although that fact can carry very little weight in offences of this seriousness. As I have already said, you have found life difficult by reason of your autistic traits. I accept Dr. Rothenberg's conclusion that this impaired your judgment, and that once you had considered it appropriate to kill another, you would have seen it through. I do not find, however, that this lowers your culpability for these serious offences. As I have already said, you were capable of making a rational decision. You knew what you were doing and that it was wrong. You knew the consequences of your actions. You may, since your time in custody, have recognised that you need help, but there is little mitigation in the fact that you have now accepted your guilt. As I have said, you needlessly put Miss Gray's family and Miss Miles through the additional distress of a trial. You continue to minimise your actions. In truth, there is little, if any, mitigation. Had I been sentencing you for the murder alone, the minimum term would have been one of 34 years, less the time you have spent on remand. The attempted murder of Leanne Miles requires a substantial uplift to that term. The minimum term I impose on count 1, taking into account the 300 days you have spent in custody before today, is 39 years and 64 days imprisonment. On count 2, the concurrent sentence is 30 years imprisonment. Stand up. Nasen Saadi, for the murder of Amie Gray, I sentence you to life imprisonment. You will serve a minimum term of 39 years and 64 days. Thereafter, it will be for the parole board to decide when, if ever, you should be released. If you are ever released, you will remain on licence for the rest of your life. For the attempted murder of Leanne Miles, the concurrent sentence is 30 years imprisonment. For the offence of failing to comply with a notice requiring disclosure, the sentence is one of 21 months in concurrent. The total sentence is therefore one of life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 39 years and 64 days. The statutory surcharge can be drawn up in the appropriate amount. Go down.
So, to clarify, for the murder of 34-year-old Amie Gray and the attempted murder of 38-year-old Leanne Miles, 21-year-old Nasen Saadi was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 39 years, so he would be able to apply for parole in around 2064 when he'll be around 60 years old. In my opinion, he should have gotten a whole life order. He's far too dangerous to ever be released. I want to start off by talking about why Nasen Saadi committed these crimes, and then look at his planning to try and commit the perfect murder. So with regards to the why, I'm so glad for details of the assessment of Dr. Rothenberg, who assessed Saadi after his conviction and before his sentence. It's always nice to have another profile I agree with, for someone else to do the heavy lifting, but I want to reiterate points he made. So Dr. Rothenberg stated that Saadi was a man filled with rage and resentment towards society, specifically women, and that his crimes were a way for him to hit back, for him to feel a sense of power and relevance that had been lacking in his life. Essentially, I think that despite no apparent evidence of hate-filled misogynistic ramblings online being found, like with killers such as Elliot Rodger and Jake Davison, Nasen Saadi was an incel, an involuntary celibate. Like them, he was probably someone who acted like a complete weirdo, and so was rejected by women, but saw no issue with his behaviour. It was all their fault. So he specifically targeted women to kill. This would serve two purposes. It would give him a sense of power, but also punish a gender that he despised. He was a weak, pathetic man who wanted to feel relevant, to feel like a god, with the power of life and death over mere mortals. But there's an important element absent from Dr. Rothenberg's observations, and that is the sexual element. It was later reported that on one occasion during his trial, whilst he was in prison, Nasen Saadi asked a female prison officer about how much publicity his case was getting, and he was touching himself whilst doing this. I think this sick bastard, like so many others I've covered, was sexually aroused by violence. I wouldn't be surprised if fantasies of murder were central to his masturbatory habits, and that he achieved sexual gratification in the hotel room whilst paramedics were trying to save the life of a woman he attacked and pronouncing another one dead. However, a key difference between him and these sad specimens is that Rodger and Davison engaged in mass murders and then removed themselves from the world, no doubt thinking they'd gone out in a blaze of glory. But with Saadi, I have no doubt he would have become a serial killer, getting the same high and sexual excitement from killing again and again and again. And so he spent a huge amount of time and effort working out how to get away with one murder, which would have clearly been the first of a sequence. You can see Saadi's twisted mindset. He used certain facts to his advantage. The fact that most murders, despite what people may think, are committed by someone known to the victim. Stranger murders are actually quite rare. Police homicide investigations begin with those closest to the victim and then move outwards. Also, police forces in the UK do not work as well together as people think. There's often politics, difficulties in getting information, different intelligence systems, etc., which get in the way of proper cross-force coordination. So Nasen Saadi's logic was that if he targeted a stranger and in a different part of the country, overseen by a different police force, that he was more likely to get away with his crimes. This was frighteningly clever, but Saadi was also incredibly stupid. Wearing the same clothing he wore to commit the murders in the days before the actual crime, and using his bank card, which could easily be traced. The latter of these two mistakes is really strange, considering that Saadi had actually researched about how credit card transactions were traced. Potentially this was just a force of habit. I can remember a few times where I was planning on paying in cash just to get rid of some loose change, but then, almost on autopilot, I got my card out and held it to the reader and left. Maybe this was just a slip up, but it would be a fatal mistake. It's actually difficult to get away with murder in this day and age, with CCTV coverage everywhere, GPS tracking on phones, and number plate recognition technology. It's not impossible, but one mistake and the whole thing unravels, and Saadi made at least two. Had he worn different clothing and paid in cash, then potentially he would not have been caught. But one man taking note of the jacket he was wearing and reporting this to the police eventually led to everything falling into place. Luckily for all of us, this monster was taken off the streets, as he would have carried on killing, and given that his first kill was when he was 20 years old, God knows how many victims he would have had. One thing that is annoyingly a mystery is the environment which produced this monster. What was he exposed to? Was he neglected? Was he abused? As I stated, in court it was reported that Saadi's family had no idea how dangerous he was becoming, but this cannot be true. His parents confiscated weapons from their son. They must have known something was wrong. Also, Saadi moved out of their home. Was he kicked out? I think his parents did know something was very, very wrong, but did they simply ignore this? Were they too scared? We'll likely never know the answers to any of these questions. But regardless of how he became a monster, that is what Nasen Saadi is, and he's exactly where he belongs. Hopefully, he never sees freedom again. So what are your thoughts on this case? If you like the content, then consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button. And you can also send a one-off donation to support the channel using the thanks button. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.